Welcome back to another video on UIPlanner training. So we're going to cover a little bit today on how to use a different method to put information into UIPlanner. Now we already covered how to do the edit time data, as we shown you before that if you come here and you click on edit time data, this is one method in which you can input information into UIPlanner. You can click a case, you can click the entity, click the line, and the time frame. Output it to Excel by using this button, edit and return. You can enter the information and then save it to UIPlanner. Now, that's not the only way in order to get information into UIPlanner, or at least into one of these cases. An entity and line in a particular time frame. Another method is you can use the model import. And the model import is a very useful tool to allow you to upload information that you do quite often or very regularly, or it's a very large amount of data. Because when you have a large set of data, it's not very efficient to try to have to manually input that. So one way is that we use this model import, and we have a couple parameters, but this is the one that you will use most of the time, is this one that's called time across import. And so if anyone is wondering where you get this model import, it's under administration right here. You can also hit Control 12 and go model import. You can go there as well. But once you get here, you can select the time across import. This allows us to import information using a given format that we can import information. There are other methods, but we're only going to cover one particular method in this training on how to import information. When you select this, it usually automatically changes some of these fields down here, right? Now, make sure that you don't click on this button, this assign values, or we really don't want you to create new files. Please allow the admin to help you with that. So please allow him to help you through creating a new profile. If you need one that's very specific, that's very unique to you, and this doesn't fulfill your needs. So when you hit that, you need to select your case that you're going to be loading to. Let's say that we're working on fuel and purchase power. So we're going to go ahead and click that case. And then we go to import options. And because of this already like a predefined interface profile, it'll automatically update and fill these in according to what the last set parameter for that was. Sometimes it's not set, it's kind of old and it hasn't been updated in a while. So like for example, when we were updating for the fall 2017 plan, it's been still set to 2017. So if that's not set appropriately, set it to the right date. And in this case it has 11 years and 11 years a monthly, and that's because you have the current year, which is a mix of actuals and forecasts, and then plus 10 years for our 2018 fall plan. Now what we need to do is we need to bring in that model import. I showed this one previous on a prior video, but if you can see here, we'll bring this in. There's kind of an error here right now, but this file actually doesn't go out to 2028. It should though. But one thing that you'll notice is that when we import information, you have entities. Now you may not always have 3 entities or 3 interface codes that it's linking to, but typically that's normal. Usually you have one for the entity group. In this case, it's a planning entity. This one's Nevada Power. The line, and then the report. And the line happens to be associated with the report, but you have to put both because you have to tell the model what line to put it on within that report. then you'll notice that at the top it starts with the time frame that you specified in the settings. So when we were in the settings, we said 2018, go by month, and all years are monthly. So that's why when you import it, that's why it starts with January 2018. It keeps going by monthly. Now you can import just annual numbers if you want, but we decided just to do monthly. And we usually stay fairly consistent with doing that since it makes it easier to use and communicate out to other users on how to use this. So anyways, you'll notice that it has the time. These column headers are provided by UIPlanner, but the line right here that you see, that was provided by the import file. When I build import files, I usually put a date in there on one of the rows in an Excel file so that you can see, is it matching? Real quick, you can see, yep, it is matching. It's the same date that I'm using. If you go out even further, you can see, yep, December 2027, December 2027. So that kind of helps you to make sure that you're lining up. Because if you don't line up, regardless of whether this says January 2018 and this one says February 2018 and so on, if this doesn't say the same date, you're loading to the wrong date. So regardless, the model can't tell what this date is. It can't really understand. Even though you see it here, it doesn't necessarily tell the model anything. And the reason why is because you see these little forward slashes right here. These forward slashes basically tells the model to ignore these rows. And they're just basically there for presentation purposes when we bring model import. The only lines that it's bringing in are basically these ones that are like the light green color. So anything that's like this hot green, neon green, or whatever you want to call it, those lines are being ignored. Now you can create your model import to just be those import lines if you want, but I always include some of these presentational lines, so as when you bring it into the model, it kind of like, okay, I can see what's going where, and it's understandable to me, and I'm okay with importing this. Because once you import it, there's no looking back. The only way to change it after you import it is that you have to go back and either re-import the data or delete it. So having these interface codes is very important. We will get into like how we get these interface codes and why they're important. We're going to show you the Excel file where this really came from. So when we have this model import, when we're ready to load it and everything's right, so the settings is right, the file's right, we have the right case selected, then we can go here to run process. It'll give us a box and it says no errors, processing errors found. It's kind of a crazy thing that they say, but it pretty much means that it's good. You might want to expand this if it's shrink down, but this is, even though you hit the save button here, it hasn't actually saved yet. You have one more opportunity to save it just to make sure. Even it says up here, do you want to save? Now you really want to make sure that you check this before you actually hit save the second time. You want to make sure, the first thing I always check is obviously you got to make sure that it's going into the right case. Because you put in the wrong case, then it gets harder to manage in the future, and we don't know, and it's kind of like becomes like a witch hunt. You have to figure out where all this information is, and it might be difficult if you input it into the wrong case. So just make sure that you input it to the right case. Typically, if your admin does a good job of locking cases, typically if he only has the one case that you're working in that's unlocked, then you most likely won't have to worry about it, because if you try to import this and let's say we put it to a wrong case that happens to be locked, if like for example right now, if we try to save this, even though this case is locked, it will actually give us an error. It'll say there are error messages on the save. Do you want to save? Do you want to see them? Yes, sure, why not? and this will it'll actually give up an Excel sheet and it'll actually show you all the errors. In this case, it says case locked, right? So the following rows were not saved. Please check your security rights and verify that the case was not locked. So that's just to show you that this is what will happen if you try to load to a case that happens to be locked. And if it's locked, just go out to your admin and ask him to unlock that case if you need to. You have to hit run process again. So anyways, the other thing too is to make sure that this looks right. That looks right. That seems right. Another thing too that sometimes I check is I just kind of hit this year column real quick, and it organizes it from in ascending order from 2018. Here you can see all the way down to 2028, right? If that doesn't look right, then maybe you need to go back. It's another opportunity to check it, just like what we were checking here to make sure these two dates match. Check and see if the start year is right as well, and the end year. Just some quick checks just to make sure before you hit that save button. Now let's go to the Excel file that this was basically from. So here you can see this is what the Excel file looks like. And these interface codes right here, you can get them by simply going to the model, go to Core Object Editor, and let's say that you want to look up an entity. And let's say like planning entity is the one that we're working in right now. We'll come here, see this Nevada Power. That's what it's labeled in UIPlanner. That's what we see as Nevada Power Company. But it actually has more than one more than one interface code. It actually has two here. Actually, no more than that. See, you can have a whole bunch of them. This is for OMAG purposes, product IDs that are only associated with Nevada Power. That's another way to say Nevada Power. See, there's multiple ways to label Nevada Power in the model. And this will all map according to these various different types of interface files to this line or this entity. And then here's this one. This one's actually this is the what the HFM has on their side. This is what they label it: Nevada Power Code Cons with no spaces. So here you can see that's the interface code, matches to what we have here. And that will tell the model to put it to Nevada Power. Now, you have to be careful here. Not all reports that you want to load to actually roll over planning entity. In some cases, you might want to have like a different entity group. Like for example, and how you can know that is by, if you look here on the run sequence set, you see how on this context column, it says all these different various things. You see the ones right here say planning entity, like for example fuel and purchase power. That's where we're going to be putting our fuel and purchase power costs that we're just looking in the file. See, it rolls over planning entity, so that's appropriate to use Nevada Power. But in these other ones, like let's say like Sierra Pacific Electric rate schedules, you want to get the entities that are for that particular entity group, or like Nevada functional plant summary. You want to get the entity groups that are part of the functional plant summary group. So you don't want to use Nevada Power or Sierra under the planning entity group. Just the functional plant summary or the rates. Sometimes it might be a jurisdiction, like Sierra Pacific Electric Retail. Now if we come back here, so here's these lines. Now the difference in the core object editor is that here you can see entity, but if you want to see line, you have to actually select line. So you have to come down here, let's select line, and we actually want to look up the fuel and purchase power report. That's a lot of information to go through. We can't find it, so one way is to kind of go here and go fuel, purchase by. Thank you. There's a lot of these flashlights. Anytime there's a drop-down menu in the model, there's a flashlight that can allow you to search for information within that drop-down menu. So here you can see this is the report that we're trying to load to. And let's look up one here. So like for example, here's this one, fuel cost deferral MPC residential dash 557100. Typically in the model, we try to label the interface mapping the same as the label that's in the report. The reason why is because this kind of helps to make things more transparent, and so it's not always a guessing game. Typically, you may not have to go to this core object editor. You could just simply just take the name from the report so like if I view calculation, now where's that 557? I think that's the one. Nope. Well, any one of these, like you have here, this one, other fuel expense dash 547000. If that actually happens to have more than one entity group. Oh, someone decided to, in case someone accidentally puts another dash in there or no dash, it would still work when you import it into UIPlanner. That's another reason why it's nice to have more than one interface code assigned to one line, is because maybe you might have a different spelling, maybe you have different abbreviation, maybe you have hyphens, no hyphens, slashes, forward slashes, whatever, any kind of information, variation of like how it's done. That way it makes it a little more error proof. Now, one caveat is that in the model, you're only supposed to have one unique interface code. So if you try to define the same interface code for another line, it actually will throw an error at you and say, wait a second, we have two lines in the model that have the same interface code. Will you please fix that? And so please don't do that. I guess we have interface code for these ones, but this probably is no longer relevant. Sometimes you can have interface codes for lines, but this one's actually a formula on both the actual and forecast columns. So the thing is that these ones probably don't need to be here anymore, but we'll just leave them. But these other ones might be. That's probably because they're a new method, and actualization is probably why we don't need them anymore. You can see here we have interface code, and see how the interface codes typically match exactly the label here for the planner object. So that makes it easy so that when you build these reports, you could just grab the exact naming convention within the report, like either through browsing the report or through viewing the calculation. You can copy it here and you should be ready to go. Now here's the report. Now typically we do the same thing as a line. We usually label the interface code the same as the report name, and we try to be consistent with that. But in case there's an issue, if you want to get the interface code for report, you go to report, and see here we have this MV group 1. Typically you'll mostly be in that one, unless you're doing stuff with regulatory or financial statements or income taxes. But most of the reports are in this group. And so we can see here, if we go down to fuel and purchase power, where are you? was all the way up here. So here you can see fuel and purchase power happens to be the same name. And again, you can also define more than one interface code to a report, but that's probably not a good idea, as you notice that there's none that have more than one here. And so that's another way you can get to grabbing it. But typically, the case is you'll find the line is the same as in the report. Where that may not be true is sometimes for like deferred energy, for example, because we have deferred energy and rate schedules, because we have like separate reports for Nevada Power and Sierra. Sometimes what happens is like we have like, for example, this one would say like total megawatt hours. There'll be a line in here for total megawatt hours, but there's also a total megawatt hour line in MV Energy Electric revenue by rate schedule report, right? So I can't have interface code that both says total megawatt hours on both reports, right? Now I could come up with a different variation of it. I could say like one's labeled total space MWH, and another one could be like total space and then spell out megawatt hours, right? But instead, typically what we do is we usually have the same naming convention, and then we just put a dash and then like MPC or SPPC at the end. I'll show you what I mean. So if we go here to line, let's go to SPPC electric rate schedule. Here's an example of one right away. You see how it's labeled megawatt hour sales per sales forecast? Well, there probably is that same line in the Nevada Power rate schedule report. So in order to accommodate that, so we don't have the same interface code for two reports, is we just put dash SPPC at the end of it to make it unique. So that's some cases where it may not be the same as a line label, and where you might have to go into the core object editor to see exactly what the name of that interface code is. But as far as reports are concerned, reports are typically, the interface code is typically the same as the report label that you see here. Now, some of these reports may not even have the interface code defined, like we were just showing you earlier. So like, let's go back here to report. You see how some of them are not even defined, some of them are blank. That's because we're not even using them for interface files. We're not loading information in that manner for them. But maybe some of them may have that capability in the future. Maybe you want to import information using the model import and using the interface file. In that case, your admin will have to go in here and define the interface code for you, or he'll have to give you access in order to do it for yourself. And if you do come in here and you have to define something, for reports it's typically best practice to just simply use the same name as the report and just put it here. Now there's no trick in trying to get information in the data area here. It's just I happen to use these very unique formulas in order to gather my information, but you don't have to. It doesn't have to be a formula. It could just be a hard-coded number. You could just hard-code this. The model accepts information in thousands, so this is technically 4,940,094,000 or 95,000 rounded up. And so the thing is that you can just hard-code a number and then load it in that way. But typically, the purpose of these interface files are to improve efficiency and getting information into the model. And so typically, you have formulas here that are referencing some other reports within your Excel sheet that is like the source of this information. And so you typically have formulas here that will gather the information for you. Maybe have a couple checks in here to kind of just make sure that all the information you gathered throughout your Excel file, you total it up and make sure that it adds up to the same number for one line that is the total within another support area within your file. And then you can just verify that before you load it or before you create your text file interface. So one thing right there again, just to repeat it, just to make sure that when you load information in UIPlanner, you need to load it in thousands, and you can either load hard-coded numbers or you can just use formulas. It's up to you, but you make sure that you convert any values that you're loading into the model into thousands. Now, there's some exceptions to the rule. In some cases, you don't want to divide by 1,000. Like, so if your numbers are in whole dollars, you may not want to divide by 1,000. In some cases, you may want to put the exact amount in there. For example, like megawatt hours. If it's already in megawatt hours, don't divide it by 1,000. If you have a price, you don't need to divide it by 1,000. Just kind of look at the report and try to figure out which method in which the information is supposed to be input. In some cases there might be places in the model where information is input by kilowatt hour. In that case, you might need to multiply this number by 1,000. So just keep that in mind when you import information. The model doesn't know how that information needs to be loaded. It is just what it is. You load it in, it just takes it. It's not going to convert the number. It's not going to do any conversion for you. It's not going to figure out whether it's in thousands or millions. You have to make sure you load it appropriately into the model. Now, in some cases, it's not. You can load like interest rates as well. That's not covered here. But one thing to keep in mind is that for interest rates, typically, like if you say like it's 2%, you typically would load it as a 2, not 0.02, because typically the model wants you to load the numbers that way. And that may not always be the case, but talk to your admin. Maybe he can help you through that and figure out where those might be. Typically when we model in UIPlanner, we try to keep it consistent so that interest rates, when you load them, you usually load them 2% is basically a 2. Or if you have 3.5%, you load 3.5. Typically that's the case. Now the other thing too, when you import information, I just want to let you know that you're not limited by this format. You can do these 3 qualifiers and then time across. You can do that. That usually works for most people. But in some cases, information doesn't have to be loaded that way. I'm just going to give you a really quick example of other possibilities. So one thing that I do on a regular basis is I load information to the ledger in UIPlanner, which actually comes from an HFM ledger that I output. Now you notice here that the model right away, it turns red because it's like, well, we don't understand what you are trying to put in here, and it throws a lot of errors. That's because this information needs to be organized appropriately. So let's go back here and select. This is actually, I have a profile that's set up for loading ledger actuals. I'll select that. And you'll notice right away it automatically hits the radio button next to base actuals, because that's where I always load them, because they're always actuals. And it changes the interface mapping, which there's a specific account interface mapping for the ledger, which we like to keep separate from the other interface, which is this other one. Now you'll notice that when I bring this information in, it still just kind of looks kind of funky, doesn't it? That's because this is what the file actually looks like. This is what the Excel file looks like when I import it into, or what it looks like when I created it. This is exactly what it looks like. It has a column A in Excel where it has all of these HFM accounts, and then it has the months, because I'm loading only 1 month at a time, because I only get actuals once a month, so I only need to load 1 month. And then I have the year and the interface code for each planning entity. In this case, I have like Holdings LLC Elim, Envy Energy Inc., Envy Energy Inc. Elim, Nevada Power, Sierra Pacific, right? And then Insurance Company and Lanza Sierra. So these are all the legal entities that we get from HFM, and then I load them in. And then I have some of this information that's in that Excel file that's irrelevant, but it's used for helping getting this information organized. Now, I have this thing set up, and this won't make any sense right now, but essentially what this does is it's going to help reorganize this information. As you can see here, you have a date starts in row 4. I didn't say date, I meant data. Data starts in row 4, which it does. Row 4, right there. Row 4. And then column interface codes are in row 3. There they are. Row 3. And then it also says optional cell B4 or value for year. And this time I have an override that says B2. So we go to B2. B2, right there. Has 2018. Value for month, B1. Right there, B1 is May. And so that actually has that. And then there's all these I'm trying to think here. We have these things set up so that it basically says on column A, we basically say this is the interface code, right? This is an interface code right here. And then on column B, we say that's a value. C, D, E, F, G, H, I. And then it says ignore J. Go back here, get to line J. Obviously, it's ignoring J. I could also tell it to ignore K and L, but that would be unnecessary, really. But I'm just basically telling it only pay attention to column A through I. And I defined what column A is compared to B through I. So this is set up, and once you have this set up, it'll always remember this every time. And now when I hit this reformat, this is what it's going to do. It's going to do exactly what I just told it. Now if you go back to this import file, you notice that it just took my file, literally the whole import file, and reorganized it. It put in kind of similar format like your interface files that was like time across. And this time it only needed 2 qualifiers. The planning entity and the account ledger interface code. And then it has this year, month, and value. Because we don't need time across because we're only really loading 1 month, right? So we just need to tell the model what year to load it to, what month, and then just give me the value. Some other parameters that's set in this thing is that HFM information comes in whole dollars, but the model needs it in thousands. So you have this parameter here. You can set it, divide it by 1,000 when it brings it in, so that I don't have to do it in the interface file. It's a nice little nifty thing. Also, this other thing too is that you set this. It says, oh, your accounts for revenue and liabilities, we'll switch those signs for you. So I don't have to do that in the interface file. It does it for me here. And how you get that the results to look like this? I'm sorry. How do you get this to look like year, month, value? That's because in the settings I set it to data not year to date. Okay? We can get into that a little more later. And then it's also a model import. We can compare that to like time across. I'm sorry, this is always that. But value across. Whereas model import's different. Or map and import, I'm sorry. Map and import, basically what that means is that you bring in information, then you're going to allow UIPlanner to modify it before it loads it into a data case. So what I was trying to demonstrate there is just that there's more than one way to import information. It doesn't have to be time across. It could be year and 12-month values, right? Year one, right? You could have year going down and then January through December. Instead of having like January 1st, like January 2018, February 2018, etc., etc. You could just have the year and then all the months for that year. That's one way to do it. You could do the line, I'm sorry, and it has annual values in there. You see that? Let me see here. This one's a little different. I'm not familiar with how that one works. This is another one. It looks very similar to the ledger load, except this one, you can change the amount of qualifiers too. If you don't want it to have two, you need two qualifiers, then year, month, value. So like for example, I could change my interface file to look exactly like this, so I don't have to do that map and import step, and just load it directly to this. Haven't used these. I'm not sure exactly how those work. I guess you just load it by year. I'm not familiar with this. I'll have to reach out to UII to really kind of get to understand what these are. But I'm more familiar with the ones up here at the top. We can probably learn together about what these are later. But that concludes our video. That kind of helps you get a little bit of an idea of how to import information in a different way using the model import. If you have any questions, please reach out to your admin if you have any specific requirements on how to get this information using this functionality.